Do you believe in setting boundaries, even if it means losing people?
They threw a damn parade for my brother, and no, I don't mean that figuratively. I mean actual fireworks lit up the backyard, people in folding chairs were handed tiny American flags to wave, and my mother made a triple-layer buttercream cake with "to the best regional director ever" piped across the top like he'd just gotten knighted. The guest list? 47 people. The budget? Somewhere between a small wedding and a new roof. The mood? Euphoric. Euphoric for him, of course. I stood in the back near the grill, plastic fork in one hand, a tray of deviled eggs in the other, doing what I've always done, making myself useful and forgettable at the same damn time. No one asked me how I was. No one even really saw me. I was the one they passed their empty plates to, the one asked to snap photos of Drew standing with our parents, with his high school buddies, with Aunt Carol and her new friend Dawn who sells pool covers. I was the unofficial event staff. And no, I didn't wear black like a waiter, but I might as well have. It's funny, in a kind of cruel way. Just the day before, I had gotten a promotion too, except mine didn't come with a glitter banner or a damn conga line. Mine came with a contract so thick it had its own binder clip and a bonus number I still hadn't wrapped my head around. I was promoted to Senior Vice President of Strategy, reporting directly to the CEO, after 15 years of putting out fires, saving clients, building teams, and quietly, persistently delivering. My new office had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city that made you feel like you were sitting on top of the world. But here I was, paper napkin stuck to my shoe, watching people cheer for Drew like he'd just won the Heisman Trophy. I wish I could say I was surprised. But the truth is, this wasn't new. This had been my life since childhood. Drew, the golden boy, the charming, funny, effortlessly likable baby of the family who could do no wrong, and me, the reliable one, the "you're so responsible" one, the one who was expected to show up, help out, stay quiet, and not need much. And somewhere along the way, I got good at being the background. Not bitter, just tired. The evening carried on like some Norman Rockwell fever dream. People gave speeches. Yes, speeches. Uncle Jerry stood up and told the story about how Drew once ran the school fundraiser in 5th grade and raised more money than all the other kids combined. He conveniently forgot that I organized the logistics behind that fundraiser because Drew had no idea how to order bulk items from the PTA catalog. But of course, why mention that part? It didn't fit the narrative. I held my paper cup of flat soda and smiled politely. That's what I'd trained myself to do over the years. Be agreeable, be pleasant, never make anyone uncomfortable. It wasn't that I lacked ambition or opinion or fire. It was that I learned early that my fire just made people nervous. So I buried it. I made it smaller. Contained. Until that night. Somewhere between the 7th toast and the DJ switching to Drew's favorite playlist, something shifted. Maybe it was the way my mother gushed his fiancé about the next chapter in their lives, eyes full of pride, or maybe it was how my dad clasped Drew's shoulder and said, "You always had it in you, son." Or maybe it was something much simpler, the quiet realization that if I died tomorrow, they'd remember to feed my cat, but no one would think to mention what I'd actually done with my life. Not because they were cruel, just because I hadn't made them see me. And in that moment, standing under string lights with a smear of potato salad on my jeans, I felt something unlock. Not anger. Not sadness. Clarity. I stepped away from the noise and walked toward the front of the house, pulled out my phone, and opened the photo app. There it was, one crisp image of my new office, taken in perfect golden hour light the morning after the promotion was announced. My nameplate sat proudly on the door, and in the reflection of the glass, I was visible, standing tall, wearing the red suit they once told me was too aggressive. I stared at that photo, my thumb hovering over the screen. For a second, I considered sending it right then and there. But no, that wasn't the moment. That wasn't enough. I wasn't going to shout my success over the noise of Drew's party. I wasn't going to let it be swallowed by confetti and karaoke. I was going to let the silence do what it had always done for me, make them forget I was there, so that when I finally broke it, they'd feel it. Because here's the part people don't realize until it's too late. The quiet ones aren't harmless. They're just waiting for the right moment. And I had just decided mine was coming soon. I left the party before the sparkler send-off, slipping out without saying goodbye. No one noticed. Not even Drew. Especially not Drew. As I drove home, the image of them all clapping, cheering, singing for him echoed in my mind. I wasn't jealous. I was done. Done trying to get a seat at a table I helped set but was never invited to enjoy. Back at my apartment, I poured a glass of good bourbon, the kind I usually saved for company, and opened a blank note in my phone. At the top, I typed, "They'll find out like everyone else." Below that, I added one line, "On my terms." Because this time, there'd be no warning, no setup, no heads up to Mom so she could make a little something. This time, the celebration would be mine. And they'd only get a glimpse if I allowed it. And when they did, they'd wish they had paid attention. There's something unsettling about realizing your life has been a quiet series of missed acknowledgments, a long, slow drip of almosts and maybes, a steady rhythm of being noticed only when someone needs help moving a couch or filling in for a canceled sitter. And as I sat alone in my apartment the morning after Drew's impromptu coronation, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm while I stared blankly at my promotion letter, still open on my laptop, still unread in any meaningful sense, I felt the weight of decades settle in my chest like damp laundry no one ever bothered to hang out to dry. My promotion wasn't just a win, it was the win, the kind of advancement that turns heads in boardrooms and gets your name brought up in conversations that happen behind closed doors. The kind that makes men in tailored suits start shaking your hand with both of theirs, with that false sincerity that tells you they finally realized they underestimated you. And yet, even with all of that, the salary increase, the equity grant, the ridiculous bonus, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. Not because I wasn't proud of myself, but because I already knew, with unshakable certainty, that no one back home would care enough to ask. The story of me and Drew is not one of sudden betrayal or dramatic injustice. It's a story that unfolded in slow motion, in small slights that pile up over years like leaves in a forgotten gutter. When we were kids, Drew was the spontaneous one, the boy who could do a backflip off the dock, who got detention for calling the math teacher dull as Dekoff, and still somehow got invited to her retirement party. He was sunshine and jokes and chaos that charmed, while I was the one who remembered dentist appointments and kept track of the grocery list when Mom worked late. I was the one who read bedtime stories to our baby cousins at family barbecues, while he snuck beers behind the garage and got high-fived for it later. And when I got straight A's, no one threw a dinner. They just said, "Well, of course, that's Aaron." That phrase, "of course, that's Aaron," has followed me like a second shadow. I got into Northwestern on a scholarship. Of course, that's Aaron. I paid off my student loans in 5 years. Of course, that's Aaron. I drove 3 hours to babysit my niece when Drew's wife went into early labor. Of course, that's Aaron. No surprise. No celebration. Just the quiet assumption that I would keep being dependable, keep being competent, keep being background support for the main act, which was always, always Drew. I remember one Thanksgiving, I must have been 30, which meant Drew was 27, when I brought a bottle of vintage Cabernet and a homemade pear tart I spent the night before crafting with brown butter and cardamom. Drew brought himself and a new girl named Katie who pronounced cranberry like it had a T in it. Everyone fawned over her, and when I set my tart down on the table, someone, I think it was Aunt Diane, actually asked if it was store-bought, like I'd swung by Trader Joe's on the way. I smiled, said nothing, and poured myself the first of 3 generous glasses of wine that day. But it wasn't just the holidays. It was the everyday things, the way Mom would forward me job postings for office assistant positions even though I had a senior role at a major firm. The way Drew's name got worked into conversations with friends of the family as though he were the measure of our collective success. The way, when he bought his first house, there was a weekend-long celebration with streamers and matching t-shirts. And when I quietly bought mine 2 years earlier, I got a half-hearted "send us some photos when you get the chance." There's something corrosive about being quietly erased, about existing in a family that claps loudly for the one who needs validation and assumes the other is fine without it. It teaches you to measure your self-worth in private victories, to throw your own parties in your head, to smile and say, I'm just happy for him, while something inside you whispers, when is it going to be your turn? So the morning after Drew's backyard fireworks, I sat with my own email still glowing on the screen, an offer that meant I had finally shattered a ceiling no one even noticed was above me, and I didn't feel elated. I felt exhausted. Not from the work it took to get there, but from the silence that followed it. And then something peculiar happened. My phone buzzed. It was the family group chat. A photo of Drew, holding his promotion plaque, smiling like he just solved world hunger. Underneath it, Mom had written, "So proud of our boy. What an accomplishment!" Exclamation points, plural. Hearts. Applause gifs. And not a single person, not my parents, not my aunts, not even my cousins who followed me on LinkedIn had so much as liked the quiet post I'd made the week before. The one with a cropped shot of me outside my office building, blazer crisp, captioned simply, "New chapter." Nothing. Not even a thumbs up. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stared at that screen and realized something sharp and final had clicked into place. The kind of realization that doesn't come with fireworks, but with clarity, the kind of clarity that only comes after you've been invisible long enough to realize you don't need to be seen by them to know who you are. They had never celebrated me because, deep down, they never really saw me. Not the real me. Just the outline of who they expected me to be, helpful, low maintenance, uncomplaining. And I had let them. I had taught them that I didn't need applause, that I'd show up no matter what, that I'd be there with the casserole, with the car ride, with the emergency credit card, and I'd do it all without asking for anything in return. But that version of me? She didn't get promoted. The woman who got promoted was done making it easy for people to forget her. She wasn't going to beg to be recognized. She wasn't going to tap anyone on the shoulder and say, "Look what I did." She was going to let the silence she'd been handed for years work for her now, let it build, let it echo, until it became the only thing they could hear. And when I finally broke that silence, it wouldn't be with a speech or a slideshow or a handmade cake. It would be with something far simpler. One photo. And a view no one else could claim. There's a moment at every family gathering right around the time the second round of drinks starts loosening everyone's tongues and people begin saying things they think are harmless, charming, or cute, when I become invisible in the most obvious and deliberate way. Not out of some dramatic act of retreat or bitterness, but because that's the role I've learned to slide into without resistance, like a well-worn coat that's grown so familiar over time. You stop noticing how heavy it really is. At Drew's party, that moment came when the speeches had all been made, the fire pit lit, and the Bluetooth speaker was playing some half-hearted mix of country and top 40 hits, while everyone tried to balance a paper plate and a red cup in one hand and gesture enthusiastically with the other. I was seated on the edge of a plastic folding chair that kept wobbling every time someone walked past, my dress sticking to the back of my thighs because I'd been in the sun too long, when Mom leaned across the table, gently tapped my elbow, and with a smile that had just the slightest glint of assumption said, "Don't worry, sweetie, you'll take the big group photo for us, won't you?" It wasn't a question. It never is. I stood up without saying anything, reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and walked backwards across the lawn, angling myself to capture the whole crew, the proud parents, the proud siblings-in-law, the proud coworkers, all glowing and grouped tightly around Drew, who stood front and center like a hometown mayor, his arm draped around his fiancée's shoulder, the golden hour light catching just right on his neatly styled hair. He looked good. I'll give him that. He always knew how to position himself. In that photo, I was nowhere. Not a single frame that day had my face in it. I was the one behind the camera, adjusting angles, calling out, "Okay, on 3. 1, 2, 3, while everyone else cemented their place in the memory book, knowing they'd scroll through these pictures tomorrow with fondness, maybe even print one for the fridge. And I'd just be the one who made sure the shot wasn't blurry. I used to think there was something noble in being the one who didn't demand the spotlight, who let others shine while keeping things moving behind the scenes. I'd tell myself that someone had to be the adult in the room, the organizer, The one who remembered Aunt Carol's food allergies and made sure the cooler had sparkling water for the pregnant cousin. But nobility has a cost, and after enough years, that cost starts to feel like theft. A theft of presence, of visibility, of acknowledgement. You begin to wonder if being the strong one is just a polite way of saying, "We know you won't make a fuss." After the photo session, which included not one but 3 configurations of just the siblings, just the cousins, and Drew with the younger kids, I found myself in the kitchen scraping dried potato salad into the trash. Watching as my aunt complimented Drew's ability to stay humble despite all his success, while not once looking in my direction. I wasn't dressed plainly. I had worn a slate blue wrap dress I loved, subtle but elegant, but it might as well have been camouflage. I could have been a ghost. Or the help. The only person who spoke to me with any genuine interest that evening was Dawn, Aunt Carol's friend, a tall, sun-damaged man with too much cologne and a habit of standing a little too close. He asked me if I worked in administration, which made me laugh, not because it was insulting, but because it was just so perfectly in line with everything else. I told him no, actually, I was senior vice president of strategy at a Fortune 100 firm, and watched his eyebrows shoot up like someone had just flicked a light switch behind his eyes. But before he could respond with whatever forced admiration he was scrambling to put together, I stepped around him, said I needed to make a call, and walked straight outside. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about them failing to see me. This was about me no longer needing them to. That promotion I'd earned, the office I was walking into Monday morning with my name on the door and a direct line to the boardroom, the clients who called me personally because they trusted my judgment more than any other VP, they weren't hypothetical. They weren't dreams. They were real, solid, hard-won facts. Facts that stood tall without applause. And it dawned on me, right there in the middle of that absurd celebration for my brother's mid-tier bump in job title, that I was done trying to insert myself into their narrative. I wasn't part of this cast anymore. I left the party without a word. No goodbyes, no hugs, no glances back. I walked to my car, slid into the seat, and for a few seconds just sat there, hands on the wheel, waiting for that old feeling of guilt or shame to creep up and grab at me, the way it usually did whenever I did something ungracious. But it didn't come. What came instead was a kind of quiet thrill, the flicker of a plan taking shape, something precise and final and sharp. That night, I sent a message to my friend Lacey, who lived in the city and owed me more than one favor. I told her I needed access to her building's private terrace, the one with the skyline view and the imported stonework, and that I wanted it Saturday at sunset. She didn't ask why. She just said yes. Because Lacey knew me. Not the cardboard cutout version that my family accepted, but the real me, the version who deserved that promotion, who deserved to be seen not as an afterthought or a bonus to someone else's spotlight, but as the main damn story. I went home and opened my closet, flipping through the clothes I usually reserved for meetings, for dinners, for things that made sense to dress up for. But none of them felt right. And then I saw it, folded neatly on a hanger, still with a tag on it. The red dress. The one I'd bought on a whim last year, tried on in front of the mirror and immediately adored, but had never worn. When I showed it to Mom over FaceTime last Christmas, she wrinkled her nose and said, "Isn't it a little much? Red is such a loud color, sweetie." Exactly. I laid it on the bed, smoothed it out, and smiled. The terrace. The dress. The glass of champagne. One single, stunning photo. Not loud. Just unforgettable. And when I dropped it into the group chat, they wouldn't be able to scroll past me. Not this time. Not ever again. The city always looks different from above, not in the way tourists mean when they talk about the view from an observation deck or how the lights shimmer at night like jewels scattered across velvet, but in the way you suddenly understand how small everything truly is. How tiny the buildings, how insignificant the traffic jams, how distant the noise of lives lived in clusters really feels when you're looking down on it from a quiet, deliberate distance. That was the thought that ran through my mind as I stepped out onto the private terrace atop Lacey's building just after 6:30 on Saturday evening, my heels tapping softly on the imported travertine stone. the soft breeze tugging at the hem of the red dress I had nearly talked myself out of wearing. I had arrived early, wanting a few moments of stillness before the small spectacle I had quietly constructed unfolded. Lacey, dependable and ever loyal, had left the terrace just as she promised, stocked with a chilled bottle of Veuve Clicquot, 2 crystal flutes, and an envelope containing the key card I needed to access the space without disturbing anyone else in the building. She didn't ask questions, not because she wasn't curious, but because she understood, perhaps more than anyone, what it meant to need your moment, to see something that had never been freely offered and finally hold it in your hands, entirely on your own terms. The sun hadn't set yet, but the horizon had begun to soften into gold, the buildings catching the light in angles that made them glow, and for the first time in what felt like years, I allowed myself to breathe without clenching my jaw or mentally calculating what task I was supposed to be focused on next. There was no to-do list tonight. No errands. No favors. No polite conversations or napkin refolds or obligation smiles. Just me, the city's skyline, and a single, sharp moment of clarity that I had earned in full. I placed my phone on the edge of the terrace wall, angled the camera, and used the timer. No filters, no gimmicks, no need for edits. The backdrop was enough. I raised my glass slowly, eyes calm, mouth just hinting at a smile, not a grin, not a laugh, just the quiet confidence of a woman who no longer needs applause to know her own worth. In that frame, I wasn't demanding attention. I was stating a fact. That I had arrived. That I had risen. That I had done it all without anyone lifting me, praising me, or even noticing I'd been climbing. And then I pressed send. The photo dropped into the family group chat with no caption, no explanation, not even a single emoji to soften the blow. Just the image, me, alone, in a red dress that refused to apologize for being bold, holding a glass of expensive champagne on a terrace that none of them had ever set foot on, toasting to something they hadn't thought to ask about. I watched the screen go quiet for a moment. Then the little gray dots appeared, typing, pausing, starting again. The rhythm of digital discomfort. First, it was my cousin Melissa, always eager to be in the loop, who responded with a simple, "Wait, where is this?" Then my mother's reply came, too quickly, as if the silence had terrified her. "Erin, are you out with friends?" "That's such a beautiful view, honey." She was scrambling. She didn't know. They didn't know. And that was the point. Next came my brother. Just one word. "Wow." Not a compliment. Not sarcasm. Just that vague, empty syllable people use when they're trying to play it cool, when they're not sure how to react, when they realize, just for a moment, that maybe they missed something important, something significant, something they were supposed to notice before it was too late. The chat started moving faster. Aunts commenting on the dress. My father asking, "Is this for something special?" And still, I said nothing. I let the photos sit there, glowing on their screens, each pixel a quiet indictment of every time they'd forgotten to ask, to include, to care. I didn't need to tell them it was a promotion. I didn't need to explain that I was now outranking most of the men they'd spent decades admiring. I didn't need to say anything at all. The silence they had given me for years, unearned, indifferent, dismissive, was now the very thing that made the moment sting. It was poetic in a way that only real life can be. They had built a habit around assuming I would always be where they left me, useful, helpful, humble, invisible, and now, confronted with a version of me they hadn't seen before, they didn't know how to respond. They didn't know where I was. They didn't know who took the photo. They didn't know if I was celebrating alone or with someone else, and the not knowing was the punishment. Because there's something deeply unsettling about realizing you missed someone's most important moment, not because they didn't want to share it, but because you didn't earn the right to witness it. I turned my phone over, screen down on the marble bistro table, and poured another glass, not out of spite, not out of triumph, but out of peace. I had never been one for revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want to humiliate anyone. I didn't want screaming matches or guilt-drenched apologies. What I wanted was exactly this, a moment of clarity they couldn't explain away, a mirror held up to their apathy, a message that didn't need words. And they got it. The city began to dim as the sun lowered further, the sky turning that impossible shade of pink and violet that only lasts for a few minutes before the world goes dark, and I sat there through it all, watching, sipping, allowing myself to simply be. Not someone's sister, someone's daughter, someone's helper, but just a woman who had accomplished something extraordinary and had decided that was worth a private toast. The chat, I assumed, would continue long into the night. They'd speculate. They'd wonder if they'd missed a party. They'd scroll back through my social media to see if they overlooked a post. Some might text me privately, hedging around the subject, trying to coax me into revealing what it all meant. But I had no intention of giving them more than what I already had. The moment was mine. And it was enough. As the first stars appeared above the skyline, I gathered my things slowly, deliberately, like someone leaving a meeting they had led and concluded on their own terms. I walked back through the penthouse hallway, heels echoing on the tile, knowing that when Monday came and I stepped into that office with my name etched in brass beside the door, there wouldn't be a cake or a banner or a family photo waiting for me, and that was perfectly, beautifully fine. Because some victories aren't meant to be shared. Some are meant to be savored. Alone. On a terrace they'll never be invited to. There's an odd quiet that settles over a situation once you've said everything you needed to without opening your mouth, the kind of silence that doesn't beg for clarification or invite conversation, but instead hangs in the air like a verdict that everyone heard and no one can deny. And as I sat at my kitchen table the next morning, the remnants of the night before, an empty champagne flute, a heel scuffed from the terrace tile, a folded red dress draped over the back of a chair spoke more clearly than any toast or announcement ever could. The sun was already high, glaring through the windows with that merciless honesty only Sunday mornings know how to deliver, and my phone was still buzzing sporadically on the table, each vibration another unread message, another reaction. Another attempt to re-enter a room they'd never bothered to look into before. The group chat had changed tones somewhere around midnight. The earlier confusion had given way to polite curiosity, and now, with the passage of enough hours to make silence feel like a bruise that had started to darken, their texts were turning cautious, as if trying to walk back their years of inattention with light. Harmless questions that felt about as sincere as a Christmas card from someone who forgot your birthday. My mother had sent a third message around 6 that morning. Hope everything's all right, sweetheart. The photo was just stunning. You looked so happy, which landed with the kind of feigned warmth that carried more nerves than love, and I found myself staring at it, not out of anger, but with a sort of detached understanding that she was only now beginning to sense the consequences of something she'd never truly considered a mistake. What struck me wasn't the sudden attention, but the way it came cloaked in performance, in effort disguised as affection, in questions that weren't really questions, but doorways cracked open just enough so that if I stepped through, they could pretend they had been waiting there all along. My aunt left a comment on an old photo I hadn't looked at in months. My father sent me a forwarded email about women executives to watch in 2025, no subject line, no message, just the link. And Drew, always a beat behind when it came to anything deeper than surface-level charm, finally chimed in sometime after breakfast, typing what I could only imagine took him longer than he'd care to admit. Just saw the photo. Looks like something big happened. You want to share it with us? I read the message twice, maybe 3 times, as if expecting something more to appear the longer I stared at it, some subtext, some real apology hidden between the words. But it wasn't there. It was just Drew, defaulting to his usual tone of harmless casualness, the same tone he'd used all his life when he knew he'd messed up but didn't want to say the words out loud. The same tone he used when he borrowed my car in college and returned it with a dent. When he forgot my 30th birthday and pretended he thought it was the following weekend. When he called me the brainy one in front of his friends like it was some personality defect I should be grateful for. And still, I didn't reply. Not to him. Not to any of them. I let the read receipt speak for itself. I wanted them to feel that space between sent and seen, that endless pause that hovers when you know someone's read your words and chosen not to respond, not to entertain the illusion that things were fine, that no harm was done. Because that space? That silence? That was mine now. I had taken it back. What none of them seemed to understand, even in their frantic digital scramble to get back into my good graces, was that this wasn't about the photo. It wasn't about the champagne or the dress or the rooftop view. It wasn't about making them feel guilty or throwing my success in their faces like some cruel surprise. It was about reclaiming the narrative, about finally acknowledging, even if only to myself, that I didn't need their validation to make my moment real. That I didn't owe them the soft version of the truth anymore. I made breakfast without checking my phone again. I answered work emails, watered the plants on my windowsill, and watched the pigeons jostle on the fire escape with the detached amusement of someone who knew she had left behind a version of herself she never really liked. When my phone buzzed again just after noon, I didn't jump to check it, but eventually I flipped it over, not out of curiosity, but habit. Another message, this one not in the group thread but sent directly. Drew again. This time, just 5 words. I didn't know. I should have. It landed differently. Not because it was perfect. Not because it made up for anything. But because, for once, it wasn't drenched in charm or couched in casualness. It was bare. Honest. A sentence that took effort. A sentence that admitted something real. I didn't reply to that one either, not because I was trying to be cruel, but because there was nothing left to say. Not now. Not yet. Instead, I stood, slipped the phone into my bag, and headed out the door toward my new office, the one with the view that stretched across the skyline, the one with my name, first and last, etched in brass on the glass panel outside. As the elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored wall. Not flawless, not shining, but full, whole, present, and unapologetically alone. Because sometimes the only revenge worth having isn't loud or messy or even visible to anyone but yourself. Sometimes the greatest victory is knowing you changed the story and didn't need to tell anyone the ending. Not yet. Maybe not ever.